High above the clouds, where the winds sing and the stars feel just within reach, there lies a palace made of crystal and light. Legends say it was forged by ancient builders, powered by the energy of the skies themselves. But today, that legend becomes real. Block by block, I set out to create a sanctuary in the sky, a floating crystal palace, glowing with magic and mystery. So let me show you how it was built. Before placing a single block, I knew I wanted something magical, something that felt like it was carved from starlight and ice. I started with a palette of quartz, all kinds of types, the chiseled, the pillar, whatever. Grab all of them. Then I had blue and white glass, and a white block from an add-on to give it that ethereal, glowing look. So I began with the floating island itself, shaping it like a jagged chunk of land pulled straight from the earth. Using stone, andesite, some calcite, pretty much all the sites you can think of, we want them. And unfortunately, I lost a lot of footage from when I was creating the biggest part of it, but the key to making it look rough and straight from the earth is to create a gradient using the blocks you have. So I personally start with the darker blocks and I drag them farther closest to the ground, and then I use the lighter colors and work my way up to the top, which is where your lightest color should be, which just gives it that texture and weight while still keeping, the magic floating vibe alive. Another detail that often helps me out is to not restrict yourself to the blocks that you might think like they go together. When creating depth, some of the strangest looking blocks create the best combinations. So in some of my footage, I did get to use pillars to accentuate the peaks of certain parts of the rocks. This subtle detail just adds a level of jaggedness that actual rocks have, because you have to think when you're building, not everything's going to be symmetrical. Nature is often asymmetrical. So I really try and work that into my designs. When I'm trying to make something look straight from the earth, it's not going to be symmetric at all. And that's really the key to building here. Next came time for the palace. And honestly, I kind of just start with the crystal center, which is made entirely out of this one glowy thingy and glass. Lots and lots of glass. Because if your palace doesn't double as a giant disco ball, are you even trying? And then I slowly built everything up from there. When creating the heart of the palace, or the crystal heart, I used a few types of glass to make more depth. I'm pretty sure it was like a deeper blue, then like a cyan, then a light blue, and then white, maybe. Until the very tips of the curves, which is where I added that glowy thingy, which is just a glowing white block from an add-on that I have. I wanted the center to feel like it was really the heart and soul of the palace, so I heavily emphasized the scale of the crystals that surrounded the center. And another way to add depth to glass is combining the glass blocks with glass panes, which is an example of something I like to do a lot with my builds. So I used that, and then to kind of tie everything together so it didn't look too spiky, I used the end rods, and I made it look like a bunch of flying particles everywhere. So in my mind, the white crystals are, kind of powering the palace to stay in the sky, very magical, very story-esque, So when I make builds, I try to keep in mind who would live in them. and what would they want / need. This just kind of helps preserve the theme of the build I want and keeps me on track. Otherwise I just keep building all day. So I was thinking, what goes with white, blue, floating in the sky? And then it struck me. Fairies. Fairies might inhabit the sky. So they might live in this crystal palace. And I got to wondering, what does a fairy want? What does a fairy need? And I find myself thinking library. As any good old castle that randomly pops up in the sky has, it needed a library. So I spent some time finding a good way to create a path to said library. And that took me a while because I got lost in all the details, so I won't bore you with that. But throughout the build you might notice I don't really put a roof on much of anything. And this serves two purposes. One, fairies fly, and they obviously need to leave from most anywhere in the castle. And two, I really hate building roofs. So I made the very hard executive decision that this build does not need a roof, which I actually think makes the floating / air open aspect really feel real. After the design was done, I decided the fairies would need a council room to discuss all the important issues they face. Like how to invoke the most chaos upon the human race. So I created a table for them to meet at. Another fun tip when creating intricate walls or curves is to use stairs and slabs. They give the widest range of mobility, and I also like to pair pillars and a few other quartz blocks to give a bit more texture to the design. This is especially helpful when you're making smaller walls like I am, so I don't really have any depth besides the one block width, but you still want them to be just as intricate as your larger designs you have. Otherwise, the whole build will kind of be thrown off. Another great example of this technique that I talked about is when I was creating the giant gate for the whole palace, because palace needs protection. I really got into creating little crevices and intricate circles out of stairs and the slabs and pillars. That's another great way you can use it, but this time on a much larger scale. Moving on, I honestly just needed something to put here so it didn't feel off, so I made a teeny little house. And I'm not going to get much into it because it was pretty boring to make, so we're going to move on, in case you couldn't tell I'm not the biggest fan. So I had finished all of that and I was like, wow, that was a lot of work. So I started to, pan out, expecting this big cinematic sigh of relief, like the music swells, the clouds part, maybe even a Minecraft angel descends or something. And yeah, it was kinda underwhelming. Just me, floating above a bunch of glass, wondering if I remembered what to eat today. But I knew this palace needed more. It deserved more. So naturally, I built a giant bedroom, and I don't mean regular big, I mean can't see the walls from the bed big. The kind of room where you could lose a llama and not find it for 3 days. 3! I also threw in a few other upgrades because if you're gonna build in the sky, you might as well go full dramatic, right? So yeah, I built the kind of bedroom that says I own a floating palace and sleep like royalty. It's actually the only part of the build with a proper roof, walls, ceiling, the whole deal. Turns out, even in the clouds, you still want somewhere to hide from phantoms and existential dread. And listen, I didn't go overboard with the interior. I made one thing. A canopy bed. That's it. Just a really majestic bed sitting in the middle of a giant echo chamber. Honestly, there's still so much room in there, I feel like I accidentally created a personal museum of empty space. So if you got any ideas for what should go in here, library, throne, pet axolotl spa, drop it in the comments below. Help me turn this oversized nap chamber into something legendary. Now, at this point, the main structure was done. The bedroom was echoing in its lonely glory, but something still felt off. Like, one side was flexing, while the other side was just existing. So I did what any overthinking builder does. I started placing a bunch of gazebo looking things around the palace because nothing says elegance like random circular structures with no clear purpose. They're kind of like mini observation towers, chill zones, vague aesthetic energy generators. I don't really know, but they made the things feel way more balanced. And to match the grandeur of the first side, I added a big empty side structure. Side structure? Hello? Just to give it symmetry. And it's mostly for looks, but hey, not everything has to have a function. Sometimes you just need a fancy porch for your palace in the sky. And that's the story of the floating crystal palace. Sparkles, sky beds, and all. If this magical build made you smile, sprinkle a like on the video and float over to that subscribe button like a little pixel fairy. Got an idea for the next enchanted project? Leave it in the comments. I'm always listening through the glowstone grapevine. Until next time, may your blocks be balanced, your phantoms stay far away, and your builds stay dreamy. As always, be good people, do great things. Thanks for watching.